All right, so we had some pretty major elections take place a couple days ago, and I wanted to focus in on one of them, which was a Democratic primary down in Orlando, Florida, where it seems like if, nothing major changes, we are going to end up with our first Gen Z member of Congress. And not only is he a member of Gen Z, but also this guy is just based as hell. So I wanted to read a little breakdown here from the Washington Post. They say, who is Maxwell Frost, the Gen Z Democratic nominee in Florida? So they say Maxwell Frost sounds a lot like others of the Gen Z generation. He's 25, drives an Uber for extra cash, and recently quit his job to pursue a more promising opportunity. His latest gig, winning a crowded primary in Florida's heavily Democratic 10th Congressional District on Tuesday night, giving him a strong chance of becoming a member of the U.S. House of Representatives. They say that Frost prevailed over more experienced Democrats, including former members of Congress Corrine Brown and Alan Grayson, and State Senator Randolph Bracy to secure the nomination, and he will be the favorite in November in the reconfigured Orlando area district. So this is partially just a result of explicitly racial gerrymandering, which I'm pretty sure he mentions in this piece. But yeah, this district that he's in is very safe Democrats. So it seems like because he won this primary, he is going to end up in Congress, which again is absolutely amazing because you're going to see some of his policy priorities here in a second that are 100% spot on. But they say that he is among the new class of mold-breaking Democratic candidates this year with working class roots. On his campaign, he highlights the difficulties he faced by his biological mother, who gave him up for adoption amid what he describes as a cycle of drugs, crime, and violence. And they say that Frost campaigned on support for Medicare for all, demilitarizing the police, legalizing sex work and recreational marijuana, expunging all marijuana convictions, and restoring voting rights to the incarcerated. So all of these things 100% based and solid policy positions that he's coming out with here, especially on the Medicare for all. That's pretty much my litmus test usually for candidates and whether or not I'm going to come out and support them, because it's a very clear issue where you're either in favor of the very obvious solution to our completely broken and dysfunctional healthcare system. We're paying by far the most of any developed nation in the world. We're getting lesser results than other comparable OECD nations. People are getting bankrupted by the hundreds of thousands on an annual basis in this country. People can't afford the prescription drugs, etc. So, coming out in favor of Medicare for all to me pretty much shows where a candidate actually stands on a lot of these issues. But also, just to touch on the restoring voting rights to the incarcerated, this kind of ties into a recent scandal down in Florida with the fascist governor Ron DeSantis, who basically was doing a little bit of virtue signaling with his security squads that he was sending out to go and arrest people who committed voter fraud. So this was basically something that he started to feed into the 2020 election lies by Donald Trump and his supporters, that the election was stolen and fraudulent and rigged, etc. And Ron DeSantis basically decided to put together a task force to go hunt down all of these people that were apparently committing widespread voter fraud, and the end result of that was embarrassingly literally only 20 arrests. Okay, so this huge operation that they conducted, this massive investigation to go hunt down the apparently hundreds of thousands of people within Florida that conservatives think were committing voter fraud, and you were only able to come up with 20 arrests. And even within the context of these arrests, it was massively fucked up because, number one, in Florida, they didn't even tell a lot of these people. Many of them were former felons, as Democracy Now! Is pointing out here. But in Florida, these people would go and register to vote, and the people who were working at the polling stations didn't even tell them whether or not they were eligible to vote. So they go and they register thinking, okay, I successfully registered to vote, so I think I can participate in this election because that's what the government is telling me that I am able to do by certifying that I am registered to vote. And then the government turns around and says, no, you voted in this election fraudulently because of your former convictions, and these people are going to be facing time in jail because of basically what boils down to a complete government fuck up on their part by not making it clear whether or not these people actually had the right to vote. So this was just a completely insane story that I didn't even get to cover on this channel, but I think it's important to point out how conservatives are still running with this election 2020 was stolen narrative, and how they're actually using this to deploy attacks against people who were literally just misled by the government as to whether or not they were able to be registered to vote. But again, he supports restoring the votes of those who were incarcerated, which is 100% based again because you served your time, right? Once you're out of prison and you've successfully gone through your sentence or whatever the fuck, of course you should be able to vote. That's the whole point of having some mild degree of, an incentive for people to, come out and re-enter society and engage with it in a productive manner. Of course, former felons should be able to vote. I mean, this shouldn't even be up for question here, especially considering the racial component of both our so-called democracy, but also our criminal justice system, where it's disproportionately minorities in this country that are thrown in jail and that get these felony convictions and are thereby disenfranchised in voting. So it's 100% intentional, and so it's good that he's trying to push back against that. But they also say that he was backed by Senators Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders, as well as Ed Markey, and other liberal lawmaker who was the author of the Green New Deal, and he was said that he was honored to support Frost. They say that the minimum age to hold a seat in Congress is 25. Frost has never run for public office, but he doesn't consider himself a political newcomer. They say that he started working in politics when he was just 15 years old, protesting gun violence after the deadly mass shooting at Sandy Hook Elementary School in Connecticut in 2012. And I mean, think about this. I mean, when he was 15 years old, and this shooting happened back in 2012. So this guy is now officially going to be, assuming again nothing catastrophic happens in the follow-up general election to this guy is going to be a member of Congress, somebody who was 15 years old when the mass shooting at Sandy Hook Elementary took place. But they say that he went on to become the national organizing director of March for Our Lives, the group organized by students who survived the deadly mass shooting at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida, back in 2018. And he also worked for the ACLU in Florida, supporting voting rights for the formerly incarcerated citizens. And they say that Frost refers to his as the mass shootings generation, which is pretty bleak, but also true. And they say that March for Our Lives co-founder David Hogg, who sometimes has some pretty cringe takes, but he basically said that you should never underestimate the power of pissed off young people. So on that front, 100% correct. But they say that Frost gained national attention 4 months ago when he confronted Florida Governor Ron DeSantis at an event in Orlando shortly after the school shooting in Uvalde, Texas. And in a video that circulated widely on social media, Frost is seen telling DeSantis that he needs to do something about gun violence. And DeSantis answered, "Nobody wants to hear from you." And Frost is being seen escorted out of the event. And they said that Frost later featured the exchange prominently in some of his campaign ads, saying that he wouldn't let those politicians silence our voices. And Frost said that he thinks that voters angry at DeSantis will help propel him to Congress. And he said, quote, "Our positive message about the world we deserve to live in is what really resonates with folks despite what's coming out of the governor's mansion in Tallahassee." So it does look like him aggressively pushing back against Ron DeSantis bolstered him in this Democratic primary. Obviously, if you are a Democrat or a leftist who lives in Florida, you are going to be looking for somebody who is actually trying to represent the interests of average working class Americans and especially push back against this far-right reactionary governor, Ron DeSantis. But that's basically just the rundown on him. Again, seems like, as of what I can tell so far, that he has very solid policy positions. But not only on that, it also seems like he has a good approach in terms of strategy, not only in pushing back against, fascists like Ron DeSantis, but also in pushing back against some of the corruption within the Democratic Party and the complete incompetence in terms of, the strategy that was deployed by the squad and other progressive members of Congress in regards to Build Back Better. So let's go ahead and watch this short little interview here from a friend of the show, Status Coup.
And to take a step back, I think Democrats in general need to stop coming to the debate at the compromise, right? And I think a lot of times we see ourselves as taking the high road, being the ones to do that, but it puts us in a situation where we're not getting anything near what we wanted in the first place. Think about things like Build Back Better, right? And the 3.5 number that the number was much higher before that, but the 3.5 number we all kind of rallied around, the fact that it hasn't happened yet. So I think there needs to be a change in the type of politics we talk about. We should be more comfortable with putting pressure on people within our own party in an outward public way. And that's also beyond my politics. It's just, as an organizer, that's what I do, right? We put pressure on people publicly until they come to where we need them to be. And a lot of times that's just how it has to work. And so I think the Democratic Party could learn a bit more from organizers on how we can push people publicly and we can be respectful, but turn up the heat so we can get what we need.
All right, so there you go. I mean, I don't know what more you could possibly ask for out of a, congressional member of Congress who represents the left, especially on the strategy portion of that, right? It's great to come out and support things like Medicare for All, a Green New Deal, gun reform, etc., $15 minimum wage at least, all of those different things, marijuana legalization, restoring the voting rights of former felons. All of those things are absolutely great, but we're never going to get those things if you don't have the right strategies in place. And this is something that I was very critical of progressives within Congress during the negotiations on Build Back Better, where basically the Congressional Progressive Caucus under the leadership of Pramila Jayapal just completely folded, and they gave in to the demands of corporate Democrats. And what did we end up with? Well, not only did we not get the original, like, what was it, $6-7 trillion Build Back Better plan that was being put forward by Bernie Sanders, but then it got whittled back to 3.5, and then we didn't even get that. We whittled it back to like 1.7 trillion, and then even that wasn't good enough for the corporate ghouls within the Democratic Party. So we end up with absolutely no Build Back Better whatsoever, which was Biden's main social spending agenda item that he put on the table. And we end up with like the completely mild and watered down and embarrassing Inflation Reduction Act that was put forward by a fossil fuel millionaire coal baron named Joe Manchin, who gets to apparently decide what the extent of our climate investments are going to be. So, I mean, you clearly see the failures in terms of like organizing and strategy and being willing to go put public pressure on members within the Democratic Party. You see the failures that we've, seen on full display recently over these recent bills that have been negotiated, whether it's Build Back Better or the Bipartisan Infrastructure Framework or the Inflation Reduction Act or any of these different bills. It's just been a complete collapse from any, degree of organizing and being able to put that pressure back on the corporate Democrats who are putting all of the pressure on the leftist members of Congress. So if you can have somebody who is not only solid on the policies, but also has an organizing background and is willing to confront the corruption within the Democratic Party, then I think that this guy has an absolutely amazing future within Congress, and I am extremely excited to see what he's going to do once he takes office.